Okay. And then I have to screen share. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. Then I have a super decent setup. Yeah, so I added accepted bad claim as a proposed definition because of two reasons. One, because Tim mentioned that he is not interested in all bad claims when considering the user story that spawned the original definition of bad claim, and only a subset. And overall, I think we all feel the same in that regard. The current definition of bad claim is very broad. So I think when each of us imagine a system we want to build that supports bad claims, we're only interested in a subset, really. So the next step is really trying to identify which subset that is. And when I revisited the original user story that spawned this, as a web author, I want to link to a bad claim in a claim repository so that my readers can support and pose a bad claim, which is also visible to any web content linking to the same bad claim. The main point here of bad claim was that it was immutable and it's a shared representation. So wherever it's shown, it's always the same, and the representation is the same anywhere where it's shown. It doesn't change. That's a key point here. But there's also a mention of claim repository, which implies that it's added to some central repository. And it implies that it has been added in the past. It has been approved, in other words. Like, there should be some step at which point you contribute to a claim repository, and then that contribution gets accepted. So hence the two definitions that I wanted to discuss today are accepted bad claims and contributed bad claims. Contributed bad claims are a bit more trivial. Maybe I should have added that one first, but I think the interesting discussion regardless lies in what makes, when will we accept a bad claim in our claim repository? And I reflected a bit of what the concerns Tim raised with the current overly broad definition of bad claim. And I distinctly recall him mentioning something along the lines, oh, but I wanted to be clear what people are agreeing or disagreeing with when they agree with a bad claim or disagree with a bad claim, when they express agreement or disagreements. So as a first bullet point of what an accepted bad claim could be, is it is clear which part of the shared representation people refer to when expressing agreement or disagreements. Or in other words, people generally refer to the same thing. An example that does not match that definition are previous edge cases. Like, you can add the Communist Manifesto as a bad claim and To Kill a Mockingbird, but because they're so big and so vast, it doesn't really, well, there might be an argument made that as a whole they represent a bad claim, but it's too long because there's a high likelihood that people will disagree on that. So that captures that first point. Let's first jump to the two last ones. It can be interpreted as a whole in a reasonable amount of time. That is, again, like, yeah, it has to do with length. Do you have a comment, Mark, on one, or is it a minor agree?
I have a comment. I can imagine a situation when there's a bare claim between specialists, and which is very intelligible to another specialist in the same discipline, but very unintelligible to somebody outside the discipline without tons of study. I think that's acceptable. Yeah. So
yeah, that's a good
correction.
I think we can modify it as such. I don't know how by if
someone with the required knowledge or with the required background knowledge.
Yeah.
Detailed, but
yeah, it's a valid point. Because otherwise it's misleading.
And accepted in the title, does it refer to other people accept that it can be put into this claim repository?
Yeah, I was going to say accepted by whom. I'm really unhappy with the name accepted bear claim.
I think, yes, by someone, but that's the whole point. Whoever manages a claim repository, you're adding the contributed claim to, someone or something or some community will have to accept it. Either you accept all of them, in which case it means anything is a bear claim essentially, or you have some
criteria.
Yeah, exactly.
See, there's a difference between trying to establish criteria, which are meant to be more or less objective and don't depend on an acceptor. Accepted for me very much means there's an acceptor making a judgment call, and with all the risks of arbitrariness.
I think that's implied because there's no way to automate it unless we can here formalize fully, which we tried to do, but by the way, last time in bad claim, like to a certain extent, unless there's a way to fully formalize what is accepted or isn't, unless there's a way to formalize these bullet points, it will always have to rely on some curator.
I think that's true, by the way, but then that needs to be part of the definition. Either we say, we assume there's a curator and that's community dependent and unspecified, and then let's make it part of the points.
Yeah, I intentionally left it out because I know Timothy is very, well, whenever I mention community, it's like, oh, but I should only be one community, which is besides the point. But yeah, I agree overall that it should be part of the definition.
Or we rename it to acceptable bear claim, which is another way of hiding the burying the by whom even more, but I don't think that's the way forward.
No, I think the definition should recognize there is a community that does the accepting. I think it's inherently part of the definition, and it also means that a claim repository is probably owned by a community, and then the goal of the CDL is to have a single claim repository, and then the goal of UMAC and PAN might be to have multiple claim repositories that are federated in one way or another.
Yes,
but that's just allows us to talk about it like that.
That's fine.
So let's include it in the definition then, unless Felix has another comment.
Yeah, I'm just I'm trying to understand what it is. Like the accepted basically means like there's a subjective validation by people. That's what it is, because we cannot have a clear definition of what's accepted and what's not, I guess. Is that what this is after? Yeah,
that's what we're trying to define now. So essentially it's that these bullet points have been judged as that the bad claim has been judged as matching these bullet points by a community, essentially. And now I need to write it up in some legible definition.
I think this is a really interesting conversation. And the way, like, thinking about like the ecosystem of multiple argument platforms that share an argument interchange format, it seems like there will be some criteria. If there's an argument interchange format, like that format wants to have criteria of some kind, and then the various platforms that use it would have their own criteria. So like when I'm hearing you guys talk, what I'm hearing is, how do we figure out which criteria we want to live on the interchange format and which criteria are for platforms to figure out?
So that's
like a little bit
perfectly interesting question.
It is a valid question, but it's not. It's besides the point, because the point of these definition discussions is to try to pinpoint terminology to be able to have these discussions.
Yes.
So I mean, if we would agree with this definition, we can start saying things as, yes, different communities can have different accepted bad claims, and the interchange format should allow representing any bad claim. But it doesn't mean that if you interchange bad claims that they will be accepted on all systems. Like, it's just to be able to use language like this.
Right.
Define these terms.
Yeah, in that case, I think leaving blanks, like assuming there are curators and assuming there are communities, and saying and involving those terms and these in these definitions makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
And they can be blanks that are filled in. They can be clarified later when what a curator is and what a community is haggled
Exactly.
over later.
Exactly.
Hey, Tim.
That is the intent here. Maybe someone can paraphrase the current status to Timothy.
So we're working on
I can kind of
acceptance.
see it. Yeah, I see what it is. Yeah.
I'm missing the word subjective a bit in the definition. Because it
It's
is
the deem.
subjective.
I think it's implicit in deem.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, right. Okay.
That's a recent addition. Just to make clear, Timothy, why we're doing this, I do want to start by saying that I will also post it in Hangouts, but the main insight was you hinted at only being interested in a subset of bad claims in this first use case, because you wanted to be very clear when people look at a bad claim and they agree or disagree with it, that they agree or disagreeing on the same thing, essentially. So it's both trying to solve that issue, and second, I noticed that this first use case assumes that the bad claim has already been added to a claim repository. So I'm trying to break that apart in a contributed bad claim, which is before it gets added to the claim repository, and an accepted bad claim. And what we're discussing right now is reasonable criteria for when a community might decide whether or not to accept the claim in the repository. Assume the CDL claim repository, for example. I try to list what I think what you feel are necessary criteria for something to be added to CDL as a bad claim.
Well, yeah, this gets down to a use case that maybe isn't accepted by everyone.
The first one? Which one do you
that's
mean?
Complicated. Claim acceptance, right? I don't know.
I think it's inherent, unless you're arguing that you want to.
It's not inherent, because
unless you want to argue that you want to allow all bad claims that get added by anyone, and they always are immutable.
That is an option that I'm still considering. So I haven't made up my mind about that, and probably I would only make up my mind by trying things out. But one approach is allow everything, and curation is an ongoing process, right?
What does curation mean?
It means any step that gets you from a bare claim contribution to the criteria you're defining for acceptance.
Exactly. So then you are talking about acceptance, and so accepted bad claim.
Except that I'm saying that acceptance is not a state that you can reach. So it's not really acceptance. It's like you could do these things or you could not do these things. It's still in the system, and there's no point where you say this is an accepted bare claim.
So for you, it's not an all or nothing. Like I guess what you're trying to say is you might imagine a system where all bad claims are allowed, even things that don't match the definition of bad claim, essentially. So even if somebody adds some of these, like good morning exclamation mark, that gets added to the system, and that will live on par with any other thing, like as in that bad claim is allowed to be used in arguments, etc., etc.
I don't know if that's a problem, Tim. In the sense, what I'm hearing is acceptance is not immutable status, but I'm sure you would still want something like provisionally accepted or provisionally refused. And of course, it's always renegotiable and to be reviewed, but it still makes sense to say, here are criteria for acceptance, for arguing why this bare claim would be acceptable or not.
So yeah, so for our conversations, we can come up with a definition that, but I wouldn't want to call it an accepted bare claim, because that implies a process as opposed to a specific standard of quality, right? When it's like saying, these things here that aren't bare claims but could still be entered into the system. Bare claim is
so that would be
stamp of quality.
Bad claims, essentially. I think these things that aren't.
Well, no, what I'm saying is that no, because Oh, I didn't see your definition for contributed bearer claim. Right.
It's not defined yet.
Right.
That's
Okay.
nothing.
Yeah. So you'd have a contributed bearer claim, which has no standards and is not a bearer claim. And then you have a bearer claim, which means it's reached a certain level of standards. And then you'd have another stage of standards that I would only then object to the term accepted, because that implies process as opposed to.
But how does your bearer
level
claim
of
definition
quality.
does not imply process? You just move the problem to bearer claim, and not, I mean, you
There's
imply the
always a
bearer claim also
process.
has some acceptance criteria, but somehow when you don't name it accepted bearer claim, it's okay. How do you go from contributed bearer claim to what do you call bearer claim?
And I'll ask a question. What do you mean? Do you mean human process by process? Because we're being very vague about process here. Automated processes would be included.
Accepted, I'm just saying the word accepted implies somebody accepted it, as opposed to.
Well, name it
like-
potato bearer claim again. Because
Well,
really
yeah, and
that's
what
not
I'm saying
the
is like we
discussion
could,
should be about.
place standards, gold standard claim, bear claim, silver standard bear claim, something like that doesn't imply a process. It implies that the information associated with this bear claim is to a certain level of standards.
Yeah, I mean the process is part of the definition,
But-
which has been approved
But
by a community.
determining sorry, go ahead.
Like, yeah,
No,
I mean, if
was
you want to
saying,
call it,
how do you ever determine that it's achieved a gold standard, that it meets a gold standard, unless through some kind of process? That's what I'm asking you.
well, I'm saying there is definitely some sort of way that it gets to something. I mean, how do you even have a claim without a process of somebody being able to, contribute a bear claim without somebody being able to submit it? But what I'm saying is I don't like the word accepted, because it strongly implies specific processes.
Which specific? Okay, again, we're not talking about the. Remember that process of this thing. We're not talking about the name. We can always rename it. Let's first try to understand what is meant by the definition, and then we can talk about. Maybe you're simply again not interested in representing this in the system. That's not what this is about. It's about trying to understand what this definition is, and whether or not it matches things or it doesn't.
Yeah.
So let's go with potato claim for now.
Yeah, that's fine.
So yes, it does imply a process, specifically the process where a community tries to agree on these bullet points. So yes, you're totally right. That is part of the definition. That's the goal of the definition, is to delineate a point at which point the community has decided that a bear claim fits these requirements. So let's go over these requirements and see whether or not that might align with your process as you might envision it. This is somewhat what I thought you were hinting at last time, because you said, I'm not interested in all bear claims. I asked you to try to define which bear claims you're interested in. This is both an attempt of that from me on your behalf, and something that I think I can agree on. If you're interested in different bullet points, that's possible, and we can also talk about that, but that's essentially what we're doing. So yes, it's a bear claim that has been approved by community, because the community deems that it is clear which part of the shared representation people refer to when expressing agreement or disagreement. Like examples where that isn't the case is this image, for example. You remember we had a lengthy discussion about this image in the definition of bear claim. Oh, but well, what is a claim here?
This claim could be that.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this does not match that definition, because a community will be, well, it's too unclear what the thing is you're agreeing with or disagreeing with, even if you can argue as a whole, you can agree or disagree with it. Then it can be interpreted as a whole in a reasonable amount of time by someone with the required background knowledge. That resolves the edge cases we had before, like the whole of Communist Manifesto and the Kill a Mockingbird, because it's too long, and actually, again, also it's not very clear which of the two which claim it is that people are agreeing or disagreeing with when they're disagreeing with To Kill a Mockingbird as a whole. So this to me is progress because we're resolving some of the edge cases and discussions we had before, even though that we're delegating it to a community that has to make these choices. But that's the reality of it. At some point, you will have to do that. It can easily be represented within other contents. That's primarily derived from the use case where I want to use this in. If the whole point is that you want to, from different content, from different web content, want to link to a certain claim in a claim repository, of course, you want to easily embed that thing you're linking to within that other content. Again, if you're gonna try to add To Kill a Mockingbird in some other website to make a point, that doesn't really make sense. So this is where these requirements are coming from. And then lastly, and this is, I think, the most contentious one, it contains no indexical reference outside of the shared immutable representation that are plural. It contains no indexical references outside of the shared immutable representation that are essential in order to express agreement or disagreements. And I think I gave an example here. What he said is true. He is not part of the shared immutable representation. And we also, in the previous discussion on bad claim, know we had to resolve this indexicality issue. The question is, this again is not a hard line you can always necessarily agree on, because things will always be somewhat indexical. Because in this case, but in this case, what he said is true. It's totally meaningless. But there are edge cases such as Paris is great. Like, do we want to accept it or not? Arguably, Paris is an indexical reference, depending on context here, that a community may choose, no, I don't want to accept that. Another community may say, oh, that's fine. And which is actually literally the discussion we've been having. Do we accept it or not?
Why do you say Paris is indexical?
Because the meaning of Paris is contextual on the...
It's ambiguous.
It's ambiguous, but it's ambiguous. But if you would incorporate additional context, like you are in France, or you're talking to a person called Paris, then it would be less ambiguous.
I apologize if you've already said this, Stephen, but I'm losing track of. It seems like bare claim has a set of criteria, what qualifies a piece of text to be a bare claim, and then it seems like accepted or potato bare claim is another set of criteria on top of that. So some bare claims would qualify to be accepted bare claims and some wouldn't.
It is a subset, yes.
I don't understand why. Why does this card in Trello exist? Why don't these criteria just go into bare claim?
That's
maybe what's the story?
Well,
maybe
the
what's the story
is,
for this card?
The story
or something like that.
The story is that we already had a very hard time trying to pinpoint the current definition of bad claim. Essentially, while arguing about bad claim, we had some edge cases that surfaced. This is more of a theoretical understanding of what a bad claim is. I think the key distinction really with this is indeed that it recognizes that at some point the community will have to decide what is an accepted bad claim or not. That is the use case.
So it sounds like these criteria are criteria specific to a community then.
They are.
Well, yes and no. I think that there will be criteria dependent on the community, but I think that the ones that Stephen has listed, we hope will be cross community, because they're kind of foundational.
I mean, it's strange that in the definition it has been approved by a community, and then it's got examples that says matches and doesn't match, and the creation of this match doesn't match is us as a community defining what has been accepted and hasn't been accepted. In other words, these examples only work for our community.
My suggestion is having created this.
By community, big.
Your sound is dropping out.
Approved by a community because they deem that it fits these criteria.
Exactly.
It's
And it's
approved by a
my examples that I hope
because
that
they
we can
deem
agree
it
on.
fits those criteria. It's not arbitrarily, I like this, I don't like this. There are edge cases because some of those criteria have some amount of subjectivity. Paris is a good example, but certainly the notion is that this is not just this community likes or doesn't like this, it's this community agrees. And it can be, can be voted, can be diktat, I don't care. It can be whatever process that community uses. It can be an automated process in some communities. And maybe there's a single community or maybe there's many. Those are unspecified. But the community deems that according to those criteria, it fits. So it's not just arbitrary. So it's not circular in the way you're saying then, I think.
Agreed.
So the exercise here is to articulate what the CDL thinks the community requirements for accepted claims should be.
I guess what I want to discuss is whether the goals of CDL could agree with these criteria. Because if that's the case, then we can start saying that these are the criteria that the CDL claim repository follows in order to accept bad claims to the repo. So yes.
I mean, what we're doing is coming up with definitions so that we can then say, I think the system should accept a potato bear claim, right? I think this use case is specifically talking about potato bear claim. But we're both kind of trying to define criteria, but also just trying to define definitions. So it's a back and forth. Bear claim was supposed to be the one that was going to be the one that would be matching the use case. And we got to a point where let's just label that as bear claim and let's try again with a refinement, right? Which is what we're doing here.
I think bad claim is more theoretical, as in, and this tries to indeed aim more towards what we want in the system. So this is the potato bad claim is hopefully something we'll use when talking about system design, whereas bad claim is something we're more likely to use when we're talking about theory.
Yeah. So another way that you could frame this without getting into community, projecting onto communities would be to say, maybe the definition that is there so far for bear claim is like the minimum requirements for what is a claim. And maybe this exercise is about defining the goal, like what is a good claim? What is an ideal claim? What is the goals for a claim? A claim in its ideal form. And then in practice, what happens is the journey of a claim on the system is claims will start out closer to that first definition. And as the community works on them, they'll get better and advance towards the ideals.
We could also leave the definition a bit more vague on purpose and just say something people can work with or something that's reasonable in the system.
That's
Does that make
really
sense?
vague. I don't think that solves the exact issue this is trying to solve, right? It's even less vague than the original definition we have of bad claim.
Or if we wanted to get away from the process implied by the word accepted, it could be this card could be it could be an ideal bear claim or a strong bear claim. It could be a qualitative adjective.
But I think quite the
that might
opposite.
express what we're after.
But we don't want to step away from the process. I think that's the whole point, is that this definition points out that there is a process. You cannot go without.
But then I either disagree with your use case or we have multiple overlapping contrary use cases. I don't know how you want to handle that, but I don't want this use case necessarily. I want a community approvable use case.
But okay, let's go back, because again, this discussion arose because for you, this current use case with the current definition of bad claim was too broad. So consider the definition of bad claim and then this first use case that's listed. I think it was you that said, I don't want that because I'm not interested in all bad claims.
Well, my main thing was I wanted to tie it to a declarative sentence. I didn't want images submitted as claims. I didn't want, I mean, there's an open question about formulas. And I don't know how we want to deal with that, but you know, I think it's counterproductive to submit an image as a claim.
Is it? Let's assume the use case where there is an image on a web page and I want to link that image to all the arguments for and against.
Yeah, this is, well, no, this is a separate thing, which is, I also am not against indexical claims.
Bad claims?
Submitted. Well, we've brought up this question and I don't know how to resolve it, but like, I would want to be able to say, this video clearly shows that something happened. And this video is going to be indexical. You're either going to have a URL or you're just going to say this video. At some point, you're going to have some, as I would imagine, entity, either a URL or something pointing to that video. Now, if you need to make it a bare claim immutable and has all the information, you're going to need to import the whole thing into the system, which I find
we didn't discuss. I mean, and those are technical details. The point is that it's immutable, right? If it's an immutable, actually, I listed examples of that. If it's an immutable external source, according to the definition, like here, this is archive. The design of Socrates is presented in this archival paper. This, I would say, matches the definition, even though the full paper is not part of the bad claim, because it links to an immutable external resource. On the other hand, like if you have a non-archival website,
define. When you're talking about outside things, I think you can't freeze the universe. You can't freeze the world. And so,
Nope.
For example, if I start talking about the president of the United States always follows the law, always upholds the law, okay? The president of the United States is
indexical.
It changes over time, but I want to be able to make that claim. You know, and it's the same thing of, you know, unless you nail your claim down into a specific point in time and specific, you know, all the specific details, which are still kind of, you know, I would expect to be able in a claim to refer to things in the real world that change over time.
What was the example? The president of the USA?
Always
upholds the law.
Okay, so the reason I would accept this one is because it is ambiguous, but it's good ambiguous, right? This claim is about, in general, whoever is president of the United States of America at any given point in time, he upholds the law. And then you can argue, no, because there was a president that didn't. That's fine. So yes, this would be an accepted bad claim in my community. So it doesn't negate.
I'll have to come up with a good example, but the point is that the world is not immutable, right? And you're referring to things in the world, right?
No, but you're trying to point to immutable things, and then the community decides whether or not, like, a certain archival source can be accepted as immutable or not, I guess. I mean, you need to draw a line somewhere, and this definition is all about letting the community decide where to draw the line.
And I disagree that you need to draw a line somewhere. I think indexical is functional. I think indexical works.
But yes, indexical works, but does it work for all? Again, do you want to say what he said is true should be allowed? Like in this use case? Let's go to the use case, right? Are you arguing that in this use case, I should be able to link, what he said is false from an external website to a central repository? Do you think that will fulfill this use case, so anyone can argue about what he said is false, even though they might be talking about entirely different he? I would say no.
Well, yes,
that
you,
doesn't
you
make sense. It
support
doesn't support the use
ambiguity,
case.
don't you? Yeah. You're okay with ambiguity. You want to see where disagreement is. The way you resolve ambiguity is disambiguation. So like I would be okay with a claim that said what he said is false. And I would hope there'd be disambiguation that points out exactly what is the he and what is the, what he said. But
for who? Because you have different websites that all use what he said, and it's a different he for different websites. So where is a shared discussion? Why add it to a central repository?
Yeah, okay, that's a really interesting question, in the sense this is a sentence that has no meaning outside of context.
Exactly.
I think that it's appropriate to store it nonetheless, but I don't think it should ever be shown to users. And I don't know if it can be referenced to. It should be recorded so that we can say, oh, this has been shown to be ambiguous. Here are interpretations in different contexts. Maybe that's useful, maybe not even in this case, or this is how you would disambiguate it. This is the process for identifying the he and identifying the statement and identifying that's all I expect from storing that kind of sentence. The president always upholds the law is really interesting because it can be a kind of generic statement. I mean, usually or always so far as of this date, or usually, or should, it could be the president should always uphold the law, or it could be this president always upholds the law, and then in which case you absolutely want to replace it, rephrase it with the 43rd or whichever president of the US always upholds the law, right? With a less ambiguous reference, one that has the necessary.
But in order to do that, my point is that bad claim needs to be accepted in the system. If the bad claim is never accepted in the system, you can make these relations. So what I'm trying to define is really when can you start making these relations? When do you want to store it so you can start making these relations?
How do you distinguish the people will enter unacceptable claims at some point. I'm using acceptable rather than accepted personally. People will enter unacceptable claims or tentative claims, and then we'll say, okay, this one is not good because, and we have to have a because, or this one, yeah, it's good, or it needs to be improved, or blah, blah, blah. And for me, there's a process of massaging a claim in towards a golden standard. That means we need criteria for the golden standard. And
that makes sense. Makes sense to me.
Here.
If the goal of here is to develop the language that we use to have these conversations, it seems like sometimes these definitions can be quite short and rely upon each other. I mean, what we say, like we have claims. I think, if we have bare claim already, so we can have a claim that someone enters. You can have a weak claim. We can have a claim that we have a claim that the system will accept, like what someone will be allowed to enter, and then with the criteria for someone being allowed to enter it, and then the criteria for it being used in a high class argument.
But that's what it is. No?
And then we can just go set about to list what those criteria are in a separate conversation.
But that's what this is. We already have a bad claim. This is referring to bad claim, and it's listing the criteria. So that's exactly what this is.
Yeah.
Question, like, because we want to develop
a hard one to align on.
But if the whole point, yes, it's hard to align on, which also makes it even harder to try to agree on use cases as adding a claim to a system. What the hell does that mean? So if it's hard to align even on the definition, it's even hard to align on the use case. It's even hard to align on the design of the system that supports the use cases. So this whole process is about taking a couple of steps back so we know what it is that we're not aligning on. Maybe it's a set of criteria, maybe it's something different, maybe it's the immutable nature. That's what we're trying to identify by defining things.
Well, the way I would think about then, I mean, accepting into a system, and I think I hear this from other people on this call, is I would imagine that the criteria would be very low. And then there'd be an iterative process through conversation where the claim would then evolve to become a really good claim or an ideal claim.
I think
and even the acceptance criteria change over time and develop, right? It's not that we can now define them. And that's why I say it should be a bit more vague. And because we're only talking about the terminology we want to use, then accepted claim is something, it's a claim community or the moderators or curators or whoever accepted a claim to go into a system so you can refer to it.
I think you have a point, but I still think it's worth doing a first stab. So an accepted or potato bear claim is a claim that is deemed usable in arguments and high quality, golden standard, whatever we want to say, according to a list of criterion, which may evolve, but at least contains XYZ, and we can start the list. I think it's perfectly valid to do what Stephen is doing, to say we should at least have these as base criteria so that we have a clue what we mean by accepting a claim as golden standard. And really, Tim, what we're trying to get from you is what is your idea of golden standard? What is my idea of golden standard? And let's see if we agree on what golden standard represents.
I think what kind of rubs up against it all is it's not just let's blue sky talk about what makes for a good claim that we would like to see in the system, as opposed to like trying to shoehorn it into definitions where we start to wrangle over specific words. And especially here where it's, you know, it's approved by a community, to me is a showstopper, because it's taking the focus away from what's just a list of criteria that we think makes a good quality claim, as opposed to, oh, well, it also has this process of...
And I think there's a misunderstanding on what we mean by approved by community. What I'm saying is the claim will be deemed at a certain point to have provisionally achieved a certain golden standard or not. And there's a process through which the claim goes so that it's evaluated against the list of criteria. And that process depends on the system the claim is entered in. And that's what system, community for me are synonyms. And I know for you, there's only one system and only one community. And for me, there's many. And that's why we kept it vague. But it doesn't matter. It's the question is, you have an idea of what criteria your system will use, and then we'll go from an unevaluated claim.
Contributed is the one I suggested, but
yeah, contributed, and I would maybe add unevaluated to a claim that has been deemed acceptable according to the golden standard by whatever CDL specific process, and I insist it's a process because you go from unevaluated to evaluated, and that's a process, and that's your community's process. Now, it doesn't mean that there's people haggling over it. It may or may not mean that, but it doesn't absolutely entail that there's people haggling over it. Maybe you can do it automatically. That's fine. It's still a community approved process.
I just pasted in some copy that we have in our documentation for goals for good claims.
Can you explain what good means here? Is it similar to what can you
so,
do?
yeah.
Is there a difference between a good claim and a bad claim in your system? For example, can you link to a bad claim, or bad claims get removed, or
the way
what makes it good?
We're currently set up is the criteria is very low. It's just a bunch of text, you know, and so people can submit a bunch of text, and you know, just like Wikipedia, like the criteria for making a Wikipedia entry is typing some text. It could be gibberish, and so it's in the system, you know, but then it's going to get moderated up and down based on whether it's matching the criteria for what's a good Wikipedia entry. So YSORS operates similarly.
So moderated is interesting because bad claims are immutable. So I think what we're trying to identify with potato bad claim here is at which point is it no longer moderated? At which point does it have like a stable thing you can refer to within the system?
I mean, all Wikipedia, there's no Wikipedia articles that aren't still moderated, right? So I don't think a state of no longer being moderated is ever going to exist, but we do want to always be able to retrace our steps in history, you know, like with version control, and we always want to be able to go back. So when I've heard you talk about immutable, in my head, how I've thought about that is we have the way our data structure is set up, which is probably not perfect, but there's versions, right? And every version of a claim is stored forever. You can always know what version 3 was.
Yeah, but you can also store versions
change.
of different potato claims to one another, right? So that doesn't rule it out. The point is at some point there was a version that was approved, and then later that might be edited, and then you can say, well, this new potato claim is a new version of the old potato claim. It only moves the problem.
Again, that is important. The immutable doesn't mean it will stop evolving. It's immutable as an object, the way the version is immutable. But we can still say, hey, you know what? This version, we thought it was good enough, unambiguous, but you know what? We discovered an ambiguity. So here are now two versions, two successive versions, which are clearer. And so you can say that this immutable claim has evolved because our understanding of it, of how it can be interpreted, has evolved. And then you look at its relations and at the fact that there's multiple interpretations in the space of interpretations. So that way, yeah, it's not because it's immutable that its status as golden is immutable. Its status is contextual. I see we agree on that. So Tim, I did not have you react to what I said about the reinterpretation of approved by a community as, I think, including what you want.
Look, the process is implied. Obviously, it needs to go through some process to get there. Why do we have to put it in those words, been approved by a community? Why can't we define it just by the criteria of what makes a claim good quality and say if it matches all these things, we call it a potato bear claim or whatever.
Okay,
that makes sense to me.
Okay, so what about which has been deemed by some process, by some community approved process? Because the fact it's not about the community approving the claims, it's the community has approved the process. The community believes the process works. And those are the users. Basically, the users use your tool because they believe the process has value.
Let me try this.
Okay.
None of these examples here, all these examples that match the definition, where is the approval process in there? Where is the showing that it's been approved by a community? Because there's nothing in these sentences or this structure that actually shows it's been approved by the community. So my question is,
wait. Before you continue, can we answer that question? Because you asked the question. This is something that might be, I mean, this is me suggesting, I just added this, right? This is my definition here. If I read that bullet point of lists, the community is me because I created this list. I think that these clearly fit these bullet points. That's the community. The community in this case is me.
What I would say is in order for those examples to match your definition, you need the earth is flat and whatever check mark or certificate they get for having been approved by a community. It comes with the process information as well. Otherwise, it could just be that, and it hasn't been approved by the community. You understand?
There you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
There you're absolutely right. I have no problem with that. I just want to point out that you're still baking in approved by the community as if it were people, or I would say approved by the community process, which may or may not involve the community. The community approves the process. Whether the process involves the community is a different matter, is what I'm trying to say is open.
But what I'm saying is, why are you making this a necessary part of the definition? when what we're going after is the criteria, and we could look at the examples and for ourselves decide whether or not it matches the criteria, right? And yet, unless it's gone through some process approval, it still doesn't match the definition.
So that's why I just added it. I guess I agree, but I thought it was implicit. But yeah, so all of these examples are as approved by Stephen. But the discussion we're trying to have is, would we all, right now, if we talk about it, would we all approve these or not? And more importantly, do we find this bullet point list meaningful?
Right, no, but that's why I'm saying, why not just take as approved by a community out of the definition and just define something that's a high quality, and then you do approved bear claim, which is a potato bear claim as approved by a community. You separate the two things so we can discuss the two things separately.
That's what
and use the
is.
term separately.
That's
No, because you have things that are not potato bear claims, but are bear claims. And you're trying to suss that out with the different criteria, right?
Of course, but you're okay. I don't believe in what you're saying makes sense. Sorry, I'll be blunt, because you're trying to say whether the sentence, the claim, the bear claim, fits the criteria or not. First, independent of process, and second, dependent of process. I'm saying there's no independent of process. There's no evaluation of the claim as meeting criteria unless there's a process to do so. There's no such thing as a claim fitting or not fitting the criteria unless there's a process of evaluation. Now, whether the process of evaluation implies
so where is process in bear claim? Where is process in the definition of bear claim?
But Mark, on our, like, we could have a list. We could do this Trello card differently. We could say this is a list of our goals for claims, and we're not going to speak. Yeah, there's going to be a process, but what that process is for another day, and we don't need to touch on that at all.
Okay, let me, because I introduced it, right? The main reason I think the process is relevant here is because the use case refers to process. Like, if part of the thing of the evaluation being done as part of the process is this bear claim useful to refer to be used in arguments? If it's not deemed useful to refer to, would it even be in the claim repository? In other words, can I link to non-accepted bear claims in a repository that will essentially be removed or mutated? And is it still a bear claim then at that point, because it's mutable? So the main reason—
No, it's not mutable. It's not mutated. It's being put in relation. It's being put in the replacement relationship with accepted bear claim.
Yes,
that replaces it, but it's not mutated.
Yes, but this would be even one step earlier. I would say that, well, you cannot link to contributed, or you cannot.
I agree. I agree. I would not link to a contributed.
Exactly.
Unapproved
so
bear claim.
you would only link to accepted ones. Once it's accepted, it stays immutable, and you can link to it. But I wouldn't have a contribution like total garbage. We have some listed here.
Look. And Joshua and Tim, just because you said we don't have the process is implicit, what I'm saying is I want to make it explicit, and I could agree that it could be implicit in theory, but that still does not warrant what Tim was proposing, to have two separate definitions, one with and without process. Because if the process is implicit, then those two definitions are equivalent. That's what I'm refusing.
No.
I would say,
okay, if you want to make it explicit in a way that's useful, or a way that doesn't tie it too much to what you're trying to do with it, I would say that by some process arrives at these criteria, right?
Yeah.
That by some process, not that is accepted by a community, because you're applying a different kind. Now, here's the reason why I want to separate into different definitions. Let's call this potato bear claim and say it's our gold standard or whatever for claim quality, right? I might want to define a process. I might want to define something like curation, define the word curation as the act or the process of improving a contributed claim in the direction of achieving potato bear claim,
No objection to that.
Okay, but that doesn't imply community acceptance. That implies, I'm using words that don't apply an acceptance criteria. It's just, we've defined criteria A, criteria B, and I'm defining the process of curation as moving one towards the other. And you may want to define this use case of accepting claims into the system as a community reviews a contributed claim and accepts it if it matches the criteria for potato bear claim, right?
And that's what we mean by community. See, okay, what do we mean by community acceptance? There's been a divergence on that, and I keep repeating it, and I'm sorry, but I think you're still not getting it. Community acceptance includes any mechanism that is agreed upon by the community to accept. And that may not entail that community has a voting process or haggling process or any of that sort. It's just any, and I've been trying to introduce a distinction, and here, Stephen, I would like you to introduce a distinction between approved by a community versus approved by a community accepted process. Like the community, by using the tool, accepts that the tool has a good process, which does not mean that they get to participate in the curation of each individual claim. May or may not mean. That's a distinction between the claims being approved or the claims being approved by a process which has been approved by the community. That's a distinction I was trying to bring all along.
I included it, I agree.
Yeah.
Okay, can a contributed claim be or a bear claim? How do I put this? Can the things below, if you remove all these examples as approved by Stephen, in those things below, that set of examples, if we took out all things approved by Stephen, what do we call that?
Bear claims.
Bear claims.
Okay, I want a distinction between a bear claim and those things that, you know, I want a word for the thing that would be approved by Stephen if he looked at it. That is a bear claim that has the criterias that Stephen would use to approve it. You understand? There's no word for me to say this is a bear claim that will become an accepted bear claim when somebody approves it. And I want that word.
Yeah, I understand you, and I agree with Marc-Antoine. It's essentially the same, but I mean, we can name it as such, and I'm even fine with changing the definition if that's your only problem. I mean, I thought the contention would be
That's
with
my
the
only
bullet
problem.
points, to be honest.
Okay, approvable.
That's my only problem.
Let's call it approvable bear claim, and then we'll have approved bear claim.
Well, bear claim criteria, essentially, because you're literally just separating
It's not
the
bear claim
criteria
criteria
from...
because you're one step beyond. There are things that are a bear claim and wouldn't match your approval criteria. And I want a name for those things in that category.
Come again?
Or rather, a bear claim is a superset of the things that would be approved because they match the criteria listed. Yes?
Yeah. Wait.
I want a name. There is a superset. Okay, there is a superset that is contributed claim.
Yeah.
Or contributed bear claim, I think. And then there's
which is not necessarily, we didn't define it, but if I would have to quickly define it here, let me try to write it. A bear claim contribution, which might not necessarily be a bear claim, even, I would argue, because it's a contribution, a contribution which intends to be a bear claim.
right. Okay, but and I have a hard stop. I'm supposed to go, but my point is there is a superset, which is the contributed bear claim,
Mm-hmm.
and there is a subset within it that is a bear claim.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a subset within that is a bear claim that matches all the criteria we're trying to list here.
And how would you name
And that should be acceptable. And that's what I'm trying to get at, is the name
Before
of
it's,
that.
before it's
claim?
accepted, yeah.
Yeah,
Acceptable
for
bear
now,
claim?
we can do acceptable bear claim. I accept that as a name, a working title, acceptable bear
So
claim.
then it is a bear claim, which, and then we just change the language.
Which should be approved. which
Yeah.
should be just replace has by should.
Or can.
Just which matches the criteria below, right? Which
Okay, fine.
meets the criteria below.
Which means
And that's it.
But
Unfortunately,
okay.
yeah, I have to go now. But
I'm
I'm
But
fine with
there's,
this.
but there's a
I'm fine with
subjective
this.
element to that. There's border
Tim-
cases. Like
I know there's
I
always
think-
border cases. I
Yeah.
know.
We
Okay.
we can talk about it later. I'm fine. Then we I mean
Okay.
I
Okay,
don't think
ciao.
see it, Timothy. I don't think it matters for us, Mark Antoine. I mean, I am fully on board with you that an accepted bad claim is simply an acceptable bad claim
that's been
as
through the
judged by a
process.
community. But I mean, if we need an intermediate definition to get there, then that's fine.
Yeah,
So let's go over it.
my problem now that you've accepted Tim's suggestion, I with should I was happy, but with Tim's suggestion I'm not anymore, because you make it sound like this can be known, whereas it cannot, because there's edge cases. Meeting criterion, there are edge cases, and because there's edge cases, it's not a hard definition.
And we just extend the definition. I think we did something similar with bad claim, actually, where we what was it?
I mean, this definition is
It's even if people do not, I mean, it's still something similar, right? It's like different communities can, do you know what I mean? We can simply say like, these
Okay,
criteria are evaluated by an individual, community, or community process.
Community accepted process. Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. Okay, sure, not good enough.
And that just postpones it to the next definition, right?
Yeah, okay, good.
I mean, we're only discussing this right now to use that term in the stories, right?
Yeah, these criteria will be evaluated, I suppose, because we're in the pre-acceptance things.
It's interesting because I do prefer to point to accepted in this use case.
I
Not
would
acceptable. So,
would
but
too.
then I can introduce that, and then okay, that's fine. I'll do that. For now, I think this is good to go.
Yeah, I would just one tiny correction. These criteria will be evaluated instead of are evaluated. Yeah, thank you.
Does that really matter linguistically? Oh yeah, I'm fine either way.
I think it does.
So the interesting bit is we spent the majority of the hour talking about something I didn't expect any
disagreement on.
Yeah, we didn't really talk about the
this,
bullet points.
And we have this fascinating list by Joshua, some elements of which I think should make it to the bullet points.
Yeah, so I think
especially the clear goalposts. That's brilliant. I absolutely want this.
Thank you. I think that what I think is brilliant is how the definition kicks the can. Like, I think that's really smart. I think for this process, like if our goal with these definitions is to give ourselves language to talk about, like, let's use placeholders and pointers, and, you know, like an accepted bear claim is a claim that matches the criteria for good claim, for good claims. Like,
yeah.
You know, and then that can be figured out and people can haggle over it. But like, I would advocate as a process for doing that kind of thing. Because all the goals of these cards is just to get us to be able to have conversations about these ideas. So, you know, and then what will happen is if people disagree, you know, we'll trace through the cards and we'll say, okay, this disagreement just means we need to actually clarify this card. But we don't, the cards don't all need to be perfect for us to be able to use them in conversations. They just need to be good enough for conversation.
Yeah. Okay, do we call it a day?
My personal.
I think so.
No, I agree. I think it's working really well, and we're progressing. Okay, this coming Friday, I really want to get a bit deeper on this whole question of what happens to concepts, claims, entities when they evolve, even though they're immutable. I'll dig into that.
Sounds good. Could you please update the calendar event?
Where is the bloody calendar? I never can.
Oh, right.
Sorry.
Okay. It's a Google Calendar. You should have access. I don't know if you're using Google Calendar.
There. But last time I tried to edit the events, I created a duplicate. So I'm not sure I'm editing the right thing.
There you go. Bye, everybody.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
Joshua. You can try again if you like. You cannot really destroy anything.
Okay. Link. Calendar in iCal format, or that's the one, right?
Yeah, in iCal, you cannot really edit. I think
Ah,
iCal is a read only. Yeah.
That's my problem. This is what I have. Let me remove that. And it's the Society Library Tech Calendar, right?
No, should be called canonical.
Oh, no, sorry, that's Society Library. That's different. Where's the other one? Where's it? Have it, obviously. Do live topic. No, because I have these events. Oh, I think maybe I have.
I just checked the sharing settings here in the members.
I have the Canonical Debate weekly call, for example, on Monday and Tuesday, but I don't even have it on Friday. Isn't that brilliant?
Then
I'm probably
not looking at the same calendar, I guess.
That's what I'm getting. Yes. Let me look again at the parameters. Oh dear.
I don't know if should I try to remove you and add you again? So maybe you're getting an email. I'll try. Oops. Okay, call.
Okay, I will quickly write up meeting notes and then
okay.
Don't forget to check off your name if you agree. I added both the acceptable and accepted. And then I think next up we might also have to add contributed. But I think the next discussion will be whether or not the first use case refers to acceptable or accepted. I would argue accepted, and I think you agree, Mike and Fon, but we can pick it up then.
I do at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. See you.
See you.